Okay, this is our makeup class for chapter 14, normal teen development. Basically, we're just going to talk about two parts, the biological or physical growth, psychosocial growth, and then the nutrition that's important at this stage. So I was going to start with a quick, just so you notice, there's a review of the EER calculation we did in class on Wednesday. We were working through this, so I wrote it out, and it ended up being about, like we said, 1,564 calories. If you want to know how we did it, you can follow through. We added the height, weight, and plugged it in. So that's there at the beginning. So going into chapter 14, I'll just show you a few of the highlights of this chapter. The first question here would be the struggle for independence that characterizes adolescent psychosocial development may lead to the development of health-promoting eating behaviors. So you might see these problems in the teens: excessive dieting, meal skipping, use of unconventional supplements, bad diets. Those are the things you might find as you're working with this age group. A meal plan for this age group. Now we've looked at all these different ages. You can see obviously the grains have more than doubled, vegetables have more than doubled, fruit servings have doubled, protein has tripled, and dairy has also increased. So those are just a little bit of a picture of the nutrient changes. We look at this chart on the last class. You can see that for the teens, they're struggling with personal identity, the values and morals, what their vocational goals might be. Physiologically, they have huge growth and maturation physically, height, percent of fat, percent of lean body tissue. Feeding wise, again, just as much as there was in the school age, a lot of peer influence, but a lot more impact on body image and comparing themselves with others. Feeding behavior to some family meals, but because of the busyness and work schedules and so forth, a lot more peer influence, and huge appetites because of huge weight gains. So those are some of the changes. Another question you might see is that due to the great variability in the timing of growth and maturation, the calculation is not based on age, but rather on the velocity of growth. So it's going to change and be different for each person, male, female, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds. It's going to be quite a variety of changes. So the normal physiological growth is based on their sexual maturity that you can guess from, or you can judge from these Tanner scales or this SMR rating scales. And that's how you can determine what stage a person is at during this period of adolescence. If they're SMR1, it's pre-pubertal growth. SMR5 is pretty much fully matured. So here's a group of what the stages look like in girls and boys. You can see how we can measure what stage someone might be at, and that will determine what their growth will be and what their calorie needs will be. So there's a lot of changes. Peak linear growth, peak muscle accumulation, peak weight gain all occur during this adolescence period. Up to 20 pounds per year. Body fat decreases in guys by 12%. And you've got a lot of bone mass also being accrued. So calcium is really important at this age. You can see a difference in guys and girls. Here's the maturation for guys, average of 14.4. They continue to grow until age 21. And then for girls, it's closer to 12 for the average puberty maturation. So it's quite a variety, quite a difference. So that's going to determine what their net calorie needs are. The other changes that are going on is the percent of body fat and lean body tissue is quite different between male and female. Fat 3%, 12% versus muscle 45 for guys, 30% for girls, 36% for girls, and that's again averages. Another group way of looking at the percent of fat, you can see here a 5-year-old and a guy versus a girl. And then as they get to be 14, you can see that the boy has lower fat percentage and the girl has increased slightly. So that's based on this other scale for healthy body fat ranges for children. We kind of just put that in a graph. So we're going to look at then the psychosocial development. There's 3 periods: early, middle, and late adolescence. And this will determine again how they might be affected by their peers, how this might affect their dietary intake. looking at these different social development stages. The Erickson's theory of development, you can see that the adolescent 12 to 18-year-old, they're looking for ego identity and intimacy. So you're starting to look at lifetime mates. So those are some major changes going on at this phase. Another thing that's interesting about this age is the adolescent brain is still developing up until age 25. So a teen we might think they're an adult when they're 21, but there's still a lot of maturation that goes on. Dopamine levels, the activity gives them a much higher desire or ability to take risks. Hyper rational thinking, so the decision making isn't fully developed. So they're going to focus on thrills. That's why drug and alcohol become very common. The pruning stage of development also can be thought as conditioning. Affects their brains for life. If a teen does not read during adolescence, then these synapses won't be developed. So you have to develop. It's a good time to try lots of new things in the teen years. So these are just some of the important developments of the brain, which will affect their psychosocial behavior. Also, you can look at the different factors that affect eating when you look at their maturation. So it's not just their physical growth, but also the environment they live in. And that can be affected by family, by food sources, the modeling that they've had, the peers, the media around them, food availability. All of these integrate to form their lifestyle, which will then lead to their individual life, food behavior, and their nutritional status. So there's a lot to consider if you're counseling a teen and helping them determine what their lifestyle is and what their impacts of their eating might be. So because of busy lives, a lot of vegetarianism occurs during this age. 4% of adolescents report adopting vegetarian diets, so this can impact their nutrition. The energy requirements are based on their activity, BMR, and their growth level, so that's why the SMR levels are important to note. Otherwise, it's the same as for an adult. Protein's the same as for an adult, but however, if they don't get enough protein, it can affect their growth, their final growth, and it could delay sexual maturation. As we know, a lot of girls with or guys with eating disorders have delayed maturation. And lean body mass can also be lower if they don't get the proper amount of protein. Carbohydrates, it's the same as an adult, just that we're trying to encourage more fiber. So the boys, a little less than what men need, girls about the same as what women need. So it's hard to get the fiber. That's something to consider. Calcium requirements, one of the biggest changes. 4 times more calcium is retained because we said at one point that we absorb more calcium as we need more calcium. So it's important that we get, since the average intake is a little bit lower than what would be recommended. Iron intake is another important thing because of the needs during menarche are higher. So we can look at, this isn't quite right, but anyway, the females, 9% of 12 to 15-year-old females have a deficiency of iron, only 11%, and 11% as they get older. Boys or males have a much lower incidence of anemia, so it really is a female-related problem, and it's based on the hematocrit or hemoglobin levels, and these are what would be considered anemic in the male and female. So that's another important thing to consider. By having anemia, it delays growth and development, can cause fatigue, so it's harder to perform, can cause illness, more illness. It's more likely to occur if you're vegetarian, restricting meals and calories. If you're obese, if you participate in endurance sports, all these can lead to a higher incidence of iron deficiency anemia. So the last thing is vitamin D, making sure that there's plenty of that because we need that UVB lights for the long wavelength is the best for vitamin D formation in the skin. Physical activity is important, as we know, for muscle and bone strength and activities to make sure the density of the bone is adequate, because we know that the density is at peak at age 30, so this is a good time to build bone mass. So just a couple more slides in this set that have to do with screening and assessment, knowing how to talk to teenagers and assess their nutrition. You can use the 24-hour recall or food frequency. where you ask questions about what they eat and how often they eat them to determine their current diet. So these are just some of the topics that are included in Chapter 14, and in class next we will possibly do one case study for teenagers and then go on to Chapter 15, looking at some of the clinical conditions. So we'll see you then. Thanks.